AI has completely changed the game for web scraping. So in this video, I'll show you how you can use the latest AI techniques to efficiently scrape data, including the latest Vision AI model, which in my view is actually a total game changer. This video is an absolute must watch if you do any kind of web scraping in the age of AI in which we're living right now. So let's say we have some kind of travel website. We're going to scrape some travel data. We have some options here. We have, let's see, 5 options, and we are currently on page 1. Right? So this is a very common type of travel website, and maybe we want to get all the nightly rate and the ratings and the title of each place here. By the way, I generated these images with AI as well. Look how good they are. I'm really amazed at how good all of this is working these days. Look how beautiful this is. So all of these images are actually generated with AI as well. But let's say we want to get the title, price, and rating of each of these items. So the easiest way is actually to just right click, view page source, just copy all the HTML and just go to ChatGPT and just dump it in here. Maybe have like a short message. Here's the HTML of some web page, and then I'm just gonna dump it right here. And then I'll say, give me the title, nightly rate, and rating of each item, and let's see how it does. All right, so it's gonna generate here. After a couple seconds, it's finished generating response. So let's see how it did. So the first one, $150, is 100% correct. 4.9. $200, 4.5. Let's double check. $200, 4.5. Yeah. So this is the easiest way of doing it. Now, another thing that they help with is the format. So if I want it in JSON format or as a CSV file, it's capable of doing that as well. So let's try it in JSON format here. All right. So here it's finishing the response. We got it all in nice JSON format. So you can see how good they are. I don't even have to go into the HTML and be like, hey, this is the HTML element that you need to get the title, and then this one for the price. You can just dump in the entire HTML structure and it can extract exactly what you want. So doing it manually, copying all the HTML and dumping it in ChatGPT is one way of doing it. Now, of course, OpenAI, the company behind it, also offers you an API, so you can programmatically do this, which is probably what we want to do, because if you want to collect a lot of data, it's not efficient to do it manually. So we want to do it programmatically. So let's say I have a JavaScript file here. I know a lot of you are going to be coming from a Python background, but my channel is JavaScript. So we're going to take a look at some JavaScript code here. So let's say we have some function here. It's going to be async because we're going to do a bunch of await. And after that, we're actually going to call it. Right? So all of the logic is going to be in this function here. So let's try doing the exact same, but just programmatically by using the OpenAI API. And to use that API, we do need to instantiate it here. So we do need to install the OpenAI package as well, which I already did. So I can just import that right here. I actually already added my API key in a .env file. We do need to load that in the file here though. So I can use the .env package, which will load up all of the variables from my .env file. So now we have the OpenAI variable here, which we can then use to access its various APIs. So one of those APIs is the chat completion. That's actually the most common one. So we want to create a new chat here. So we can say messages. We can have a lot of things here, actually a history of messages. We can specify some kind of system role. I find that actually not necessary. You can keep it pretty basic. It will produce good results. So here we can say this is a user message. So we can just pass along the same message as what we did in ChatGPT. So here we can say something like, here is the HTML. Actually, I'll make it a template literal so we can easily use a variable in here. Here is the HTML of some travel website. Now we don't actually have the HTML here yet. So we need to actually use Puppeteer or something like that to get the actual HTML. We'll do that in a second. We still need to get the HTML from that website, right? So we're going to get that. Here's the HTML from travel website. Give me the title, nightly rate, and the rating of each item in, let's say, JSON format, right? So this will give us some response. All right, so this is how we can programmatically hook into OpenAI's models. Now we do need to get the HTML in the first place. So how do we get the HTML of this page? How do we get that programmatically? Well, you could make a simple fetch call with just node fetch or whatever fetching library you have in your programming language. But usually we do want to get a little bit fancier, like taking a screenshot or clicking on certain elements. So we'll use Puppeteer here. Now, one of the problems you're going to run into is that when you make make requests to a website, which is what we're going to do here, is you're going to get blocked. And so these websites often have protections in place and they will restrict you, do things like rate limiting. So what we're going to do is we're not going to directly make a network request ourselves. We're going to do it through a proxy. And we're going to use Bright Data for that. They have a scraping browser product, which we can use with Puppeteer to deal with those restrictions that you inevitably are going to run into. So I actually did another video with Bright Data some time ago in which we did some e-commerce web scraping. So check out that video as well. So once you log into the dashboard and created your proxy, because we're going to make a request through Bright Data, they will give you your information down here. I don't want to show it because it's my username and passwords, but that's all you need. It's super easy to set up. So that's one part. Now the other part is we want to get the HTML with Puppeteer. Now to make this work with Bright Data, I'm going to use Puppeteer Core. So what I'm going to install here is actually Puppeteer-Core. This will not install a complete Chromium version, but only the core functionality. So let me install this. All right. So now we have Puppeteer. Now we also have Bright Data. So now we actually want to get the HTML. So what we can do is simply use Puppeteer here. Make sure you import it from Puppeteer Core. And here we need to connect with that proxy that Bright Data gives us, because then the request will go through Bright Data, which helps with those restrictions. So we say browser WS endpoint and then it's WSS. And let me actually make this a template literal, because here you need to add your username and password. And that's actually all the setup that you need. I actually put that in an environment variable, which I called Bright Data auth, right? So this is in my .env file. And the way that looks is just username : password. You put your username there and the password there, and that's all you need to make sure that the requests go through Bright Data. Now here we do need to add something else, which is the host here actually. So here, this host, I will copy and just paste that. So this is all we need to get connected to Bright Data. And now it's just business as usual with Puppeteer here. So we have a browser here. Now we can open up a page. Now I also like to set the viewport, because by default, Puppeteer sets the viewport pretty small. I like to make it more like a desktop. Now actually it suggests these for me. Actually, that's fine with me. So this is essentially all just set up here. Now we actually want to go to the page. Go to the target website. Then we can get the HTML. So we can say page.goto. Now, where do we want to go to? So in this example, I actually spun up a simple website here on Heroku. So I'm just going to copy this and I will actually put this in a separate variable here, target URL. I'm going to paste that right there. Now I can copy this variable and that's where we want to go to. Right? So I will replace that with this. All right, now with Puppeteer. Now, when we arrive at that page, we don't immediately want to get the HTML because there could be some JavaScript. There could be other things still affecting the HTML. So we want to wait a little bit. So here we can specify some options. So wait until DOM content loaded. There are other options as well, like network idle, and then some number 0 seems to be popular here. And what you may also want to do is just have a plain second or so of just waiting. So in JavaScript, what you can do is you can just create a new promise and wait and resolve that after, let's say, 1 second. Right? So you don't need to know JavaScript. This is just a way of sleeping in JavaScript for a second. All right. So then here we can actually collect the data that we want, right? So we want the actual HTML, and that is very easy to do with Puppeteer as well. We can do page.content and will give us the complete HTML. Once we get the HTML, we want to give that to OpenAI. Now, just like what we did manually before, here's all the HTML, give me the data. Now we're doing it programmatically. Now, before we do that, I highly recommend that you actually just log and see what you get for the HTML. Because remember, you're paying for whatever you're passing to OpenAI. We'll talk more about pricing as well, but you do want to make sure that you're not, passing too much, especially here with just raw HTML. I find that often you have a lot of text in the HTML that you don't need. So let me actually run this script. So I'm going to say node scraper.js, right? So we're just logging the HTML to see what we get. All right. So we get a warning here. We can ignore that. All right. So after a couple seconds, I get all the HTML here. You can see Florentine Hills Resort. That is indeed what we have here on the page as well. So let's actually see. This is what we're all going to pass to OpenAI right now. You can see here above the body, we also have a bunch of styles. So there is styling here. Let's see. And then here even more, right? So here we have even more styling. You can see there's actually a lot of things going on here. And if you don't change this, this is what you would pass to OpenAI, right? Which costs a lot of tokens. You're going to pay a lot for this. So typically you do want to do a little bit of processing here before you actually pass it off to OpenAI. One simple thing we can do is only continue with whatever's in the body. We don't want to have all that styling. We only want to continue here with whatever's in the body. Now my Copilot should actually be able to help me out pretty well with this. So let's see if it can pick up on what I want to do here. All right, so here it can evaluate this within the context of the page. So it will run in the DOM of that page and it will give me the inner HTML of the body. And that actually should work. So I'm going to log this one more time. And now we don't even need this one. because it can do it directly here on the page itself. So I'm gonna run this one more time. Let's see what we get. All right, so here I get my HTML again, and let's see if that other stuff has been removed. Now you can see it's much shorter, right? So this is a simple way of just cleaning things up a little bit. We actually don't even need this line anymore. Actually, let me just change this because this is how we're collecting the data. And we also want to close the browser because you can see here, my terminal here is not finished yet, right? So here we do want to make sure that we close the browser, right? And then after that, we can make the actual call to OpenAI. We don't need the browser for that. This is just for collecting the data. Now we can pass it off to OpenAI for analysis. So let's actually make this work. So I'm gonna say, OpenAI, give me the title, nightly rate, and rating. Now it expects the HTML here. So let's actually rename this to HTML, right? So this is the HTML that we want to have some analysis on, and that's what we're passing to OpenAI. OpenAI will give us a response. It will actually give a lot of information. I like to log the entire response, and I will add the number 1 to that because it gives some other information as well, like how many tokens you used and other things as well. So I like to log the entire thing. Now the actual data that you're actually interested in, so like the response to your chat message, is typically quite nested. Yeah, so here you can see my Copilot helps me out. Response.data, the choices, .message, .content. So this is typically the actual data. So let's actually log both and see what we get. I'm gonna clear my terminal and then I'm gonna run this script. We'll widen it a little bit. Okay, so we actually got a problem here, which says you must provide a model, of course. Yeah, so here I didn't specify the model that we want to use. So let's use the latest one at time of recording. That's actually, let's see, GPT-4 Turbo Preview. Let me clear this and try this again. It may actually take some time, but you can see now we have an issue here. I'm probably not using the correct format here, but at least we are logging the complete response here. So for number 1, yeah, so here it will give us some information. So the amount of tokens we used, these are what we gave to the model, so prompt tokens, and also how many tokens we got back. So how big the response was. You pay for both, actually. Also of interest usually is the finish reason. So stop is actually usually a good sign. If there's a problem, usually it has a different finish reason. So here it probably should not be data in here. So I should just make this response .choices, take the first one, .message, and then there is some content in there. So I'm gonna clear this one more time and then let's get the data one more time. All right, so after a couple seconds, I get this result. Let's take a look. The first part here is the complete response, but now we are correctly logging the data that we're actually interested in. And it gave us the following. So Venice Palace Suites 154.9. Venice Palace Suites 154.9. So that looks all right? Florentine 200, Florentine 204.5. Yeah, so now we can programmatically scrape the data through a proxy so we don't get blocked, and then programmatically pass it off to OpenAI to get some analysis on that. So this is already much more scalable than doing it the manual way or getting blocked all the time. Now, one downside is that you do need to make a call to OpenAI each time. We can prevent that by just taking the HTML that we get and just doing that analysis ourselves. So instead of making a call to OpenAI, hey, here is maybe where we would have our own analysis code. And we can actually ask ChatGPT for that as well. So I'm gonna copy that HTML actually, and then here's the body HTML of some page I'm scraping. I'm gonna dump that HTML in there, write some code to get me the title, nightly rate, and the rating of each item in JSON format. So let's see what it can do with that. So it's gonna do some analysis here. All right, so here it's gonna go with the response. So it says something about extracted all the information. Now it gives me the actual JSON data, which is not what we want. No, give me the actual code to get that information. Okay, so it gives me it in Python. No, give me this in JS. So here it gives me a suggestion. You can put your HTML in some variable, and then here it's gonna write some actual code to actually extract that information. So here you can see it can already pick up where you can find the title, nightly rate, and rating. Right. So in the past you had to dig down into the HTML, and then here's the H2. That's what we want to use. Right, because these LLMs are really good at text analysis, and that is ultimately what code is. It's just a bunch of text. So it's very good at extracting the exact information that we want. So this is the code that we want to run on that HTML, right? So you can run this code instead of making that call to OpenAI, right? So you could save money that way. Now there are some issues with this approach as well, which is that if the HTML is a little bit complex, you often do need to go into the HTML and specify which tags to use. And often those bigger websites will actually deliberately change change the HTML structure so that you can't properly scrape it. So every time they change the HTML, you would have to update this code as well. Another problem is that if you do it this text way, because we're just getting the information from text essentially, the problem with this will be that if you have, let's say, a website that has some kind of strike through and then a discount price, maybe this 150 is a strike through and there's like $90 next to it. Now in the HTML, it may not be clear that this $150 has a strike through. Right? That's just CSS. The line through there is just CSS. So in the HTML, that may not be detectable. And so if you do it this text-based way, it may still think that the nightly rate is just this $150, let's say. So those are the downsides of text-based scraping and extracting the data based on the text. So let's actually take a look at the Vision API that OpenAI also offers us. So it's GPT-4 Vision, and they give some examples here, but let's actually take a look at our code to see what we need to change in order to get the same results based on the Vision API. And we're also going to take a look at which one is going to be cheaper, the text-based way or the Vision API. So here we were getting the HTML and then passing that to OpenAI. That's the text-based way, you could say. Now what we want to do is we want to take a screenshot and we want to pass along that screenshot to OpenAI. So I'm going to remove this. We don't want to collect HTML anymore. We want to take a screenshot. Very easy to do. Works with Bright Data's scraping browser here as well, no problem. We can take a screenshot here, and here we can specify the path under which it's going to save it here in my file system. Now the important thing to note here is that the extension that you use will determine what type of file it's going to be. So here it's going to be a PNG file, which has the highest quality because it's lossless. But it also comes at an additional price because remember, we're going to pass this to OpenAI in a second. And based on how large the image is, you're going to have to pay basically your prompt token. So instead, you may want to use a JPEG, which is slightly lower quality, but you save a lot in size. And another thing is, we do want to grab the entire page. So by default, it will only grab it whatever's in the viewport. So then it would only grab this part here, but we want to have the entire page. Let's see what happens now. And let me comment out this entire OpenAI call because we're going to change that. So I'm going to comment this out for now. So we're just going to see if we can get a screenshot here. So here we should see a screenshot pop up. I'm going to run this script. Let's see. All right. So here we got an issue here because we're still using the response variable, and that's what we just commented out. But we do get a screenshot here and this looks perfectly fine. So now this screenshot is what we're going to pass to OpenAI. So OpenAI should be able to see that there is $150 here in the text. There is some rating here, a title. Let's see if it can actually properly extract that from the image. So let me comment this back in again. So here we now have a screenshot. We close the browser and now we want to pass off the screenshot to OpenAI. So how does the API change here? Well, not much at all actually. It's still going to be this chat completions, but the model is going to be GPT-4 Vision Preview and you're still working with messages. So let me replace this with what it should be. So I just replaced this with what it should be for the GPT Vision model. So here it's still going to be role user and then we have an array of content here. So we tell OpenAI, give me the title, nightly rate, and the rating of each item in JSON format. Right, the exact same as before, but now we're not passing along the HTML as you can see. Here now the second object is going to be the image that we can pass along. So here the type actually needs to be image_URL. And then here we have image URL, which is another object here. And then we have the actual URL to the image. Now you may think actually Copilot thought it was going to be, something like this. Now this does not work. You can only pass in a URL like that if it's a public image. So maybe you have uploaded this somewhere. You can just give OpenAI the URL of that. Now here we have a local image. It's part of my file system here on my local computer. So in that case, we cannot pass a URL like that. We need to do it in base 64 encoded format. And actually it's very easy to do with Puppeteer. We can actually just specify the encoding here to be base 64. And that's what you get as a result here. So we can just call it base 64 image or image base 64. So now this will hold basically a string which represents the image. And that's what we pass along now under URL here still. And actually it needs to be in a specific format here. So we can actually, Copilot actually helps me out here. So it's going to be data image JPEG, and then it's going to be the base 64 string like this. All right, so this is basically it. All right, so now we are passing along this image. Let's actually see if it can give us what we want. So I'm going to clear this. I'm going to run this one more time. Let's take a look. All right, so after some time, let me make it a little bit wider, we get a result, and this result looks very similar to what we got before. That's a good sign. Here we also get some information about how many tokens it used. We can compare this with how much it cost previously when we were just passing the HTML in a second. But here we are getting the data that we want, right? So Venice 150 4.9, Venice 150 4.9. So that all looks good. We seem to get the correct result here. And so this approach is maybe what you want to go for, especially if you have complex complex HTML structure where the text-based way may not work properly, or you have a lot of fancy CSS that may not be picked up by the text-based approach. So we're also going to take a look at what is cheaper. Maybe this is actually cheaper than the text-based approach, right? All working still with ByteGrad's proxy here, right? So we're still always making the initial request to this page here through ByteGrad, so we don't get blocked, and then here we can still take a screenshot, and that still works as well. All of that is still working as well. You also may want to add the max tokens option here. So by default it's actually pretty low, so you may actually get a result where it says something about that it doesn't have enough space to output the result, and in that case the finish reason will actually be something else. So that's why you want to take a look at the finish reason. If you run into that, you may actually want to increase the amount of tokens, right? So they give 300 in one of their examples. Now we don't need that for this case. So here let's take a look. For this image here that we were passing, this resulted in 1128 tokens as an input. Now they give you a way of changing this, or at least playing around with this. So they give you the detail option here. So you can actually also set it to low, and what it will do is it will take your incoming image, it will resize it to make it lower resolution, and then it will pass it to the model, which should dramatically decrease your amount of tokens actually. So let's actually take a look. So here 1128, let's remember that. I'm gonna run this again. All right, so here I get a result again, and now let's take a look how many tokens we used. We used 108 tokens. Remember previously it was 1128. So this is a dramatic decrease, but let's actually see if it did it properly. So Venice, $219 per night. No, that's not correct. Right, so we have Venice, it should be 150. The rating is 4.9. That's correct, but you can see here it starts to make mistakes. Right, so this is something you want to play with. Depends a bit on how. This is actually much cheaper, and actually on the pricing page here, you can play around with this. So here, Vision Price Calculator, you can see if the image that you pass to the model becomes bigger, the price increases here, right? Now, if you make it low resolution, it will be a fixed low resolution. So no matter how big the initial image is that you pass to OpenAI, it will be a fixed price here, as this calculator is showing. It will increase the likelihood of mistakes. By default, it's actually set to auto, I believe. So OpenAI will actually take a look at your image and will decide for you what the resolution should be. Right? So maybe this is not something you want to use. Right? So just the standard setting gave us correct results, but it cost us something like 1128 in tokens. If we compare that with the text approach, I'm gonna Control Z back to our text-based approach so we can take a look at those at that amount of tokens. So we don't need a screenshot here. All right, so here I Control Z all the way back to the text-based approach. So now it's going to be based on the HTML that we pass to OpenAI. Now we did do some cleanup of the HTML before we passed it, right? So if you just pass along the entire HTML, how much would that cost us? Let's take a look. Right, so this is going to be the cost giving the complete HTML to OpenAI. All right, so then here we get a response, and actually we still have the same mistake where this should of course be without data, but that doesn't matter because we're interested in the tokens. So you can see this is much more. Remember, with just the image, we had something like 1100. Here it's 90,000 tokens because I'm passing along the entire HTML, which could have a lot of things in there that we're simply not interested in. I think I probably lose a couple dollars on just this one request right now. So hopefully you're enjoying the video. And so for the text-based approach, I think it's really important that you clean up the HTML before you do anything else with it, because it can have so many things that you're not interested in, which will affect everything else downstream. Right, so let me just do it with the cleaner HTML. Let's see what result we get. All right, so here I get a result. Let's see how many tokens this cost me. Here I'm actually only paying about 600 tokens. So this would be a bit cheaper than the Vision right now, but it's also because it's simply a very small page, right? So this is a very simple page. There's not that much HTML if you just look at the body tag. Now I did some other tests, and actually most of the time actually the Vision API will actually be cheaper, because in the real world the HTML is going to be more complex. Definitely make that comparison yourself to see how much you can save. So one more thing about the Vision API, so this Vision API is interesting because you can also ask for other things like clickable elements. Give me the coordinates of all clickable elements on this page. So let's actually see what it gives us, because if it can give us the coordinates of buttons and links, we can use those coordinates to instruct Puppeteer to click on them, which means we can easily do pagination. But also if you have like a pop-up, it can identify it like a cross, and then maybe it can click that button to close the pop-up. All right, so here what we get is, let's take a look. So here, I'm sorry, but I can't provide coordinates. Right, so it's not able to do that right now. Now my guess is that this is going to rapidly improve in the next few months. OpenAI seems to really be focusing on images and videos right now. So it should be able to detect that at the bottom here we have a set of buttons here, for example. I think that should be pretty easy to identify. So that's something that I think is going to become quite powerful as well. And so with all of these AI tools, and now also with ByteGrad's scraping browser, you have a very powerful web scraping setup. This is how I would do web scraping. This is a very convenient, scalable way of doing web scraping scraping right now. Now I'm using Puppeteer, so that's why we're using scraping browser. They have an even simpler solution here called Web Unlocker in case you're just doing simple fetch calls yourself without Puppeteer. It works very similarly, so you just connect to their proxy, you pass along your username and password. So I want to thank ByteGrad for sponsoring this video, and I hope that this was helpful for your web scraping endeavor. Thanks for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.